Hey everybody, how y'all doing? We're going to continue on our study of the Bill of Rights here with our fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth amendments, focusing in mostly here on your trial rights, rights that nobody ever really wants to have to deal with, but probably good to know. Okay, so let's get rolling here. Our Fifth Amendment, whole bunch of stuff in here. Okay, and then I'm going to read it because there's a whole bunch of things that I try to explain. Let's take a peek though and see what it says. Number one, big part of it is something called a grand jury. So a grand jury is a special jury that will decide if there's enough for a trial or not. So this usually comes into play when there's a big case, like a major case or very public case that happens. And a grand jury is a special jury that will basically decide, all right, is there enough evidence to let's put this person on trial? And then there can be an actual trial going after that. And that's what a grand jury is. So have a way to make sure that we're just not accusing random people of something, okay? Next thing is called double jeopardy. So if you're found not guilty, you can't be tried for the same crime a second time, right? You can't just keep retrying. Great example of this is the O.J. Simpson case. Back in the 90s, O.J. Simpson, famous football player, actor, his ex-wife and her new friend were killed, and he was put on trial for it. He was found not guilty in the trial, but then later on wrote a book that was called If I Did It. And you can see the title here on the book, how it's kind of that way. And everyone kind of thought this guy was guilty. And even if he had walked out the door and said, yep, I did it, right the day after, he could not be tried twice for the same crime. He could be put on a different crime, but not the same exact charge if found not guilty. That's not the same as saying your case was dismissed or that kind of deal. And so just know there's double jeopardy. You can't be tried for the same crime if you've been found not guilty. You also have the idea that the you cannot be forced to testify against yourself. So this is a part of basically the right to remain silent. Understand that if you are on trial, the burden of proof is on the government, okay? On the police and all the kind of stuff that comes in that way with it. So the police, the DA, the government, the burden is on them to prove it. So you are allowed to remain silent and not testify against yourself. You don't have to. They cannot make you confess to a crime. So while a lot of people say is when you're asked a question, they'll say, "I plead the fifth." The fifth means that you don't got to say a word. The police have to tell you this. This comes in the Miranda rights, the Miranda v. Arizona case, where they say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And if you're ever arrested, the cops got to tell you that and remind you of that, so you don't say anything that will get you in more trouble potentially. You have the right to due process. Due process is equal treatment under the law. So essentially, all trials got to be the same. They should be the same. So you can't do one trial for one person, a different trial for another person because they have more money or whatever it might be. And just that there has to be equal treatment. Everyone has to be treated the same under the law. Every trials must follow the same process. That kind of thing. And lastly, they can't take away your private property without fair compensation. It's called eminent domain. A little picture you can see down here. And that's basically saying that if the government needs to take your property for something, they can. Let's say they're going to build a new highway expansion and it's going to go right through your house. Well, they could try to buy your house from you. You can say no. But then if they need to do it for this program, they can take it from you. They have to pay you is the only thing. They must pay you a fair wage or a fair amount for it. A great example is Badger Ammo. That used to be all farms. And then when the Army came in and military and government came in to make the Badger Ammo plant, they took all the farms that were there. And cemeteries, you name it, they took it over. They had to pay the people for it, though. They just couldn't just take it and kick them off. They have to pay you a fair price. That's what eminent domain means. Sixth Amendment, same thing. More of our trial rights are going to be here that if you're on trial. To make sure that if you are put on trial for something, you have a fair trial is what it comes down to being. So let's break this down real quick, all right? Number one, you have right to a speedy public trial by an impartial jury. So it means that, number one, they cannot just lock you up and say, oh, your trial's going to be in 15 years. You can ask for your trial to be within 2 weeks if you want to, okay? Your trial must be public. All trials are open to the public. You walk into, pre-COVID, right? You could walk into the Baraboo Courthouse, sit in the back row and watch a trial. As long as you're quiet and respectful and all that kind of stuff, you can watch any trial you want to. We used to go to a trial for my law class in high school. We took a field trip to the court and watch trials all day. That's kind of boring. You also have a trial by impartial jury. So maybe you know somebody or your parent have been requested for jury duty. Jury duty is basically they will let you know that you've been selected for jury duty and a jury must be impartial. So if you're ever called for jury duty, they're going to ask you if you know the person. They're going to ask you kind of some questions about the case and make sure you aren't going to be somebody who is going to make a decision right away. Actually listen to the trial and then vote on guilt or innocence based off the information you're given. I have a teacher friend who was called for jury duty, and the trial was for one of his former students. And they asked him, do you know the person? He goes, yep, I know him. I taught him in 6th grade. I coached him basketball for 4 years. Do you feel you can be an impartial juror in this case? Nope, I cannot do that. And they dismissed him right away. You have the right to be informed of the charges. So essentially, if you ever get arrested, they have to tell you what you're being arrested for. A lot of times when somebody is arrested, they'll say you're arrested on suspicion of this, and then they must charge you with it by the DA. So they'll say they'll bring you in for your initial appearance. They'll say you are charged with this. They can't just say we're holding you because we're holding you. They must tell you why you're being arrested or tell you what you're being held on suspicion of. You have the right to face your accusers and bring witnesses in your defense. So essentially, you're allowed to defend yourself, what it comes down to being. You're allowed to provide a defense for yourself in court and allowed to bring witnesses to back you up and evidence to back yourself up, which in some countries does not happen. You have the right to an attorney. That's where the public defender over here comes in. So you have a right to an attorney in a criminal case. And if you're in a criminal case, you can't afford a lawyer, the government will give you what's called a public defender. Somebody who is paid by the government to represent people. They must do a good job. They can't, phone it in. But if you can't afford a lawyer, they'll give you one. And that's kind of what the rule is in terms of having an attorney. It's also having an attorney present when being questioned. So if you ever say, I want my lawyer, they have to stop talking to you. Do you have a lawyer? And the lawyer can be there to make sure that your rights are taken care of, your rights are being respected. They're not trying to do anything to trick you into, saying something you're not supposed to say. So those are really your trial rights. They're actually really important. Hopefully you're never on trial for anything, but if it ever happens, it's good to know these things, right? So that your rights are respected by everybody and we don't have, and you have a fair shake in court. The Seventh Amendment talks about $20. So basically it talks a lot about essentially civil trial. So when somebody sues somebody is what it comes down to being. And the law basically says that if you're suing somebody over $20 or more, it can be a jury trial. This does not happen very often. It only happens in really, really big federal lawsuit cases. But most of these go to a small claims court thing under a certain amount of money, depending on what state you're in. So if someone would say, crash into my car or whatever, or someone would say vandalize my house on homecoming, and damage something, I could then sue them for money to repair or replace that kind of thing. If it's technically if it's over $20, I can ask for a jury trial. The jury trial will be a lot more expensive than that, probably. Most go to what's called a small claims court, where a judge, things like Judge Judy or Judge Joe Brown on TV, a judge can then just tell you what it is, okay? And instead of it being a whole case of they've made a decision instead of doing a jury trial. Last one is the Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor accrued usual punishments. Essentially, the punishment must fit the crime is what it comes down to being. You can't be like, oh yeah, you got in a fight with somebody, your bail is $1 million. The bail, the amount of money you pay to get out of jail until your trial, has to fit the crime. It can't be excessive or too much to basically keep you locked up. Essentially, you can't be, fining exorbitant amounts of money for little itty bitty things. Make sure that they're fair. Cruel and unusual punishment, the other part of it, often the death penalty is brought up in this case. In terms of cruel and unusual punishment, other things brought up in this case are things like solitary confinement and work details. So death penalty is legal in 22 states. The green states on here is where it's legal. They use it in more states than other states. Texas is big into it, Florida, etc. Wisconsin has never had the death penalty. And even method of death penalty is big, talked about a lot in terms of lethal injectors, electrocutions, hanging, all that kind of stuff. Most states do lethal injection now, and if you have other ones as their backup, Utah has a firing squad yet. You can request if you want to. They talk about the juvenile death penalty. So if you commit your crime under the age of 18, you can be tried as an adult, but the question is, should you be put on to death row? So it's been talked a lot about that way. Other things are solitary confinement. In some prisons, you're in solitary where you are locked up for 23 hours a day. You're allowed 1 hour alone outside of your cell. And people question if it's appropriate punishment or not, or if it's psychological, damaging to people and that kind of stuff. Other debates are things like chain gangs and hard time, like doing forced labor in prison. And if they have to go make people work, that kind of stuff has been discussed too. Eighth Amendment is an interesting one. Make sure basically that punishments fit the crime and that things aren't too crazy. there are those, ladies and gentlemen. Please do the You Be the Judge sheet that's also in Classroom. We're going to discuss that and go through it in class. Thank you for your attention and your time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day.